Eloheinu, Melech Ha'olam, Asher, Bachar, Banu, Mikol, Ha'amim, V'nasan, Lanu, Es, Taraso, Baruch Atah, Adonai, Nosein HaTorah. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. So I was very sure last week that we were going to finish this week. We'll see. I realized when I looked at it, there was a little more information. So maybe we'll finish this week, maybe not. I didn't write it on the group. First I was going to right, last class on Rus. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to say something that's not going to happen. So maybe we'll finish this week. We are definitely towards the very, 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 very end of the work. So what happened last week was that Boaz, the leader of the generation, the judge of the generation, his court had declared that the biblical prohibition against marrying a convert from Moab or Ammon was only for the male converts of Moab and Ammon. And this was completely not applicable for the female. And we said it wasn't a innovation of his court. It was reminding them of the true explanation of this biblical precept that just had been forgotten over disuse because there really weren't converts from Moab and Ammon, and therefore they had forgotten that originally when they received this from God, it meant only a male convert. So Boaz and his court had reminded everyone, so to speak, of the law. And then we come to the case at hand of Rus, and God had fortuitously sent right on the scene Tuv, Boaz's uncle, and the closer person to do the levirate marriage, because he was Machlon, Rus's previous husband's uncle as well. We said that Elimelech, Machlon's father, had two brothers, Salma and Tuv. Seemingly Salma had no sons, and seemingly Tuv had no sons, Salma had one, Boaz. Salma has passed away. So at this moment, Elimelech is gone. Yeah, sure. Elimelech is gone, Salma is gone. So we have Elimelech's brother Tuv, and we have Elimelech's nephew Boaz. And those are the only two males left in this family. So the only two people that could do this levirate marriage on some level with Rus to elevate and aid the soul of her husband, Tuv's nephew, Boaz's cousin, Machlon. Rivka, did you want to dedicate the class for someone? You could say it or type it, that's fine, whatever works. What's the name? Deanna. Do you know Deanna's father's name?
I think it's James.
Okay, so this class should help the soul of Deanna, the daughter of James. And I'm sorry for the pain you must be feeling.
Thanks to Diana, 10 years ago, I was able to start keeping Shabbos because she took over troubleshooting phone calls for me, and she enabled me. And through all these years, I was able to keep my job because she took it upon herself to take my calls during Shabbos.
That's a tremendous merit for her.
Yeah, I was praying for her recovery. She died very suddenly from COVID. Young, she's 58.
Wow.
So
it's very painful, but is a very big merit for her soul that she for 10 years helped you keep Shabbos.
Yeah, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be able to keep my job. So,
wow.
Thank you so much.
For sure. I'm sure she has tremendous merit for 10 years of helping you keep Shabbos, that's a very tremendous
Yes,
merit.
yes.
She's
I'm-
exactly doing her job,
Yeah.
helping
Yeah.
a Jew connect to God. That's exactly what she's in this world to do.
Comforting to know that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely. No. I'm imagining, understanding the pain that you must be feeling. I'm very happy that this class should help her.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we were saying that Machlon has only two male relatives around. His uncle, Tuv, his cousin, Boaz. Tuv, uncle is considered closer than a cousin. So Boaz says, let's go for Tuv. Let's go for my uncle and Machlon's uncle. So God, saving everyone time, has Tuv walk right by Boaz's court. And Boaz calls him over and he says, listen, I have a proposition for you. Naomi, your brother's widow, she's destitute. She's going to sell the fields of Elimelech, your brother. It's a big issue to keep them in the family. Would you buy them from her? So then, even though she's selling them, they're still in the family. And Tuv said, I'll do it, which was very nice, very gracious. And then he said, okay, but there's a second part to this deal, which is to marry Rus, because just as you want to help Naomi with this financial issue, we want to help her dead son and give this to his soul. Tuv said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to mess up my lineage. You, Boaz, could do it. You have much bigger shoulders than me. You do it. Nobody will question. I do it. Everyone will question. I know your court, perhaps he knew Boaz's court just said this is legit, but maybe another court's going to say it's not legit. I don't want to start up. And he didn't understand, perhaps, that Boaz wasn't enacting an innovative legal verdict, but actually he was saying the truth that always was, but people forgot. To have said, I can't handle it. You do it, Boaz. It's a great idea for you. You're righteous. Your merits will protect this union. I don't have such merits. I'm just a regular person. I don't think I have enough merits to protect this sort of dangerous union. So in general, it's viewed that he messed up here. He didn't live up to what was being offered him, this opportunity by God to come into this relationship with Rus. Now, obviously, of course, God wanted Boaz and Rus to marry, but still, everybody has free choice, and Boaz was given this choice, and this would have been a very, very, very high aspiration for his soul, and he checked out on it. So he's not viewed too highly, and that's why, as we said, his name isn't even, we know his name, I've said his name the whole time, but in the work itself that Shmuel wrote, we do not say his name, so to speak, not to embarrass his name, or he didn't live up to his name, because his name means good, and we don't view this as so good. But he checked out. He gave it over to Boaz. Boaz says, okay, I'm going to do it. I'll redeem the lands. I'll redeem Machlon's soul. I'll marry Rus. And all the people around gave tremendous blessings for this union. As we said, Rus is in the house with Naomi. She doesn't know what's going on. She's probably praying. But in the meanwhile, publicly, everyone knows they're getting married. All right, so we're up to chapter 4, verse 13. And so, conclusion of this whole dramatic story of our 4 chapters, this is the climax. Boaz took Rus, and she became his wife. He came to her. God let her conceive. This was a big thing. She's 40 and was married for 10 years and was childless for 10 years. So for all 10 years that she was married to Machlon, they lived together for 10 years, she never conceived. Boaz also, it seems, was childless. That's what it seems from what we understand. And he's 80. So Rus had 10 younger years when she was 30 to 40. She didn't have any children. Boaz has been married his whole life. His wife just passed away a few months ago. He's 80. He had no children. And this one night when they're together, Rus, who's never been able to conceive, and Boaz, who's 80 and was never able to conceive, they conceived. God let her conceive. This was a very supernatural kindness going on here. And she bore a son. It's interesting. It says that the word in Hebrew for pregnancy, herayon, is 271, which according to the sages is the days one is. pregnant for. And of course, as we mentioned many times, they were together, she conceived, and at some point later in the night, Boaz passed away. And we said this was obviously very tragic for Rus. I mean, this is her second husband. This is a man that's saving her from her state, her sort of abandoned state. Now, at this point, obviously, financially, she's secure because she's his wife, but there goes her husband. But she does have this child. And this child was the purpose and the reason our sages say why Boaz was still alive. And that's why God held him out until the conception of the child. And when the child was conceived, that was it. His mission in this world was over. He passed away. Rus, conversely, as I mentioned before, had enjoyed a very long life. She's 40 now. She's having a son, Ovid. That son has a son, Yishai. That son has a son, David. That son has a son, Solomon. We're told that Rus was still alive when Solomon, her great-great-grandson, was ruling. So she enjoyed a very, very, very long life. Because Solomon ruled after David passed away, and David lived for 70 years. And David is the son of Yishai, and he's his final and seventh son. So he wasn't conceived when Yishai was 20. And Yishai is the son of Ovid. So even if Yishai is Ovid's first child, I don't know, we're talking minimally some 125, 130 years later. Just minimally with the numbers. And she's 40 now. So that's saying she lived until she was about 170, at least. And I was being pretty narrow with the numbers. So she could have lived later. Now, of course, we know in earlier times, people lived for hundreds of years. But at this time in history, for someone to live 170, 180 years was unbelievable, unheard of. So this was an enormous, enormous, enormous gift God was giving Rus for all that Rus gave God. Of course, we know there's a rule. God never will be indebted to you. The Eibusher Bleibnish came Balchayv. God never, ever, ever will be indebted to you. Now, obviously, she received many blessings, and seeing her very righteous son, Ovid, her amazingly righteous grandson, Yishai, both of whom were so holy, they were unbelievable in their holiness. And David and Solomon, imagine, as we say, the nachas, the joy, the Jewish pride she had in this progeny. This was one way that God was giving her back for all she gave to God. So the next verse. So here she is. So Boaz has passed away. Rus is expecting. And then Rus had this child 9 months later. Verse 14, and the woman said to Naomi, now here it's very interesting. At this point, Rus had a child. But all the women were like giving Naomi all these blessings for the child because they understood that this was Rus's child, but this was Naomi's child also. Why was this Naomi's child? Because this child was containing the energy of Naomi's dead son, Machlon. Remember, that's the whole idea of a levirate marriage, that this child continues the life of the deceased husband. So it's Rus's child. He has his own name, Ovid. He had his own destiny. His trajectory was obviously very different than Machlon's, because Machlon went off to Moab, abandoned his people, lost everything, and still didn't return to God. And Ovid, who carried his energy, was a great, great, great tzaddik, an incredibly holy person. But he was carrying that energy. So therefore, it was like Naomi was given another chance with her child. So the woman said to Naomi, blessed be God who has not left you without a redeemer today. May his name be famous in Israel. So the women are blessing Naomi and praising God that, look, Naomi, you know, you've been through so much. It's been so hard. And now you have a surrogate child for Machlon. There's someone else to replace Machlon here, and that's a very beautiful, beautiful comfort. An amazing comfort. This reminds me of an amazing story I heard yesterday. I'm sorry, this is very parenthetical, but it just like clicked in my brain. It's not like a levirate marriage, but it's a little something sort of similar, and it clicked in my brain. So I'm taking it as providentially someone's supposed to hear it. For all the rest of you, my apologies. But it's a long story. I'll try to make it short. And being me, even though I just heard this last night with all the names, I forgot them. But there's a woman in Israel whose name I forgot. I remember her last name is Emmanuel, but I forget her first name. This story happened like, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. And she had lost her husband. She had an only child, Dvir, and I think she had like 1 or 2 girls. At least 1, maybe 2. And her son was in the army. And Israel was going into Gaza then. And she was very nervous. She just lost her husband. Now her son's going to war. She said to him, you know, send me a text when you cross into Gaza. She made up some code language with him. I'll know you're going. You should be safe. He sends her the text. And that was unfortunately the last she heard from him, because he was actually the first soldier killed when the Israelis came into Gaza. So she was in enormous pain and enormous anger at God. Took my husband, took my son. She felt all alone. I guess her daughters were older. She just felt very, very abandoned. And this went on for a few months. And she was just feeling very like stuck and very like angry at God, but not really like communicating with him, just upset. After about 6 months, she finally broke down and started talking to God and saying like, did I do something wrong? Like, tell me, if I'm such a sinner that like I need to lose my husband and my son, let me know. And if I'm not, show me that I'm not. Show me that it's okay. Because to me, this doesn't feel okay at all. She had her conversation with God, first time in 6 months. And again, I'm butchering the story a bit because I'm saying it so briefly. But shortly after that, her daughter asked her to go with her to some big concert in Israel. Thousands and thousands of people were going to be there, you know, get a little break, Mom. Fine. She goes with her. She had no real interest, but she goes with her daughter to the concert. She's sitting with her daughter at the concert, and this beautiful little child comes over and starts smiling at them, and she's talking to him, and she asked him his name. He said it. I forgot it. And so she's like engaging with this beautiful little child. And like from like a bench away, the father of the child calls out and says to the child, come to Abba, you know, come back to daddy, come sit with Abba and Dvir. Remember, Dvir was her son's name. And she sees Dvir, I mean, that was her son's name. Who's Dvir? And she sees the father's holding a little infant. She's like, I mean, it's not that in Israel, Dvir is an incredibly uncommon name. I mean, it's a name in Israel. It's an Israeli name. But still, it was her dead son's name. And she looks at the baby, and the baby looks about 6 months old. And her son's been gone about 6 months. So she says to the man, how old's your baby? I don't remember what he said. Maybe he said 5 months. Oh, and she's thinking, my son passed away like 6 months ago. And here's a little baby with his name, same name, about 5 months born after he passed away. So she said, very, you know, sort of weird question to ask this person you never met before in your life, sitting at the bench next to you among the thousands of people at this concert. She said, can I ask you why you called him that name, Dvir? Because, you know, in her head, Dvir was her son. What's he doing calling his baby Dvir? And he said, you know, I'll tell you. He said, you know, no one ever asked me why we called him Dvir. Again, in Israel, Dvir is a name. It's not an unusual name. But no one ever asked me, but I'll tell you actually why. He said, 6 months ago, my wife was expecting. She was in her 8th month. And she went to the doctor. And she heard very, 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 very horrible news about the baby that was going to be born. Horrible, horrible, horrible news. And she came home like so upset, like here she's carrying this baby and the baby's going to be whatever. Very, very, very bad stuff they told her. And she was very broken, and her husband was very broken. He said, and then we were like, listening to the radio or TV, and we heard that the soldiers had just gone into Gaza. And we heard the name of the first soldier that died, Dvir Emmanuel, this woman's son. And my wife said, God, if this child is born, if he's alive, if he's born alive, I'm going to name him after that soldier. That's like my gift to you for this baby, for his life. And a month later, he was born, and he was completely healthy, despite everything the doctors told us a month ago. Completely healthy. Nothing they said happened. Completely healthy. And we named him Dvir. And she's like, oh my gosh, because that Dvir, she said, that's my son. This is a true story. I mean, I didn't watch it because I was driving. Last night I was driving back. My husband played it. But they have literally the clips of the woman talking, of the man talking, of the mother talking, like of all the people talking about what happened. You look at the hand of God, but here these two people that never met each other, live in completely different cities. I think that she lives in some kfar, they live in Jerusalem, like would never have known each other ever. They both happened to come to a concert with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. God puts them one bench away from each other. And God creates a situation when she turned to God and said, God, show me if I'm so bad. And that's what this happened. Show me. And if it's not like that, show me. And he showed her, because now she sees that there's a child there, that her son, so to speak, is living on through this baby, which was a tremendous, 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 tremendous comfort. So it sort of dinged in my mind. Obviously, the story has a lot of lessons in of itself. Obviously, you see when you turn to God, God does answer. I guess he was waiting the 6 months for her to remember to turn to him. And sometimes things, of course, it was very harsh. I'm not taking away the harshness of the situation, but there was a tremendous comfort there that she felt so strongly when she realized there's a child that's continuing her son. And that dinged in my head when I was saying this, because that in essence is what the ladies are saying. Of course, here it's much stronger, because this was literally a levirate marriage done for this purpose, but in essence, it's the same idea. The women are saying to Naomi, so now you have your son. Now Machlon passed away, childless, not living his life in the best way, and now you have a new opportunity. Now you have this son. And so the woman said that God didn't leave you without a redeemer, because if he hadn't been born, you would have been childless at this point. I mean, she of course had 2 sons, but they both passed away. So she's childless. She's got nothing, no husband, no sons. But now God sent you a redemption, because now you have this child. Now you're not childless, because your son is living on in this child. Now it's interesting, because these women are giving tremendous blessings now. We're going to see in the next verse. Well, in this verse already, his name be famous in Israel. The next verse says, he'll become your life restorer, sustain your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you has borne him, and she's better to you than 7 sons. It's nice for daughter-in-laws to be spoken about like that. So the women here are giving tremendous blessings to Naomi. And it's very interesting, because we're told, the sages say later, in the merit of these blessings, David's line was not cut off. Meaning there was a very, very wicked woman, Atalia, a queen, a wife of one of the kings of David's descendants. And when her husband passed away, she took over and wanted to be the ruler. And what she did to be the ruler was she tried to kill out every male descendant of David. Because she was just like, she knew if there's anyone around, well, they have the legitimacy, not her. She's not a descendant of David. She's a woman, and she's not a descendant of David. We have seen sometimes a woman rule, but she's not a descendant of David. She's not in the royal line. She's nothing. And of course, it's supposed to be a man, descendant of David. And she killed out every male descendant of David except one. There was one descendant left. A tiny baby. His name was Joash. And his uncle, who was the high priest, hid him in the attic of the Holy of Holies because no one's going there. It's not a place anyone could go. And the high priest goes once a year to the Holy of Holies. So it's the most safe place you could have in the entire Israel. So he and his nursemaid, was a little baby, was hidden in the attic for 7 years. They lived there until the high priest was able to bring him out, and he led a rebellion against Atalia, and this little child, Joash, was appointed king. But the sages say, in the merit of the blessings these women gave, that's what saved the line of David. That's a very interesting thought. Obviously, God wanted David's line to continue, but it's also showing the human component. It's also showing, I thought it was interesting because, you know, sometimes people are so happy and they babble away and tell you all these blessings that you think like, okay, just, you know, like it's nice, but you know, you don't take it so seriously, they're blessings. But the sages are saying these blessings protected David's line. So we're told, there's an expression of our sages, Alti birchas hedyo kala beinecha. Let not the blessing of a simple person be liked in your eyes. Meaning, every human has an ability to bless. Blessings, of course, come from very righteous, great, godly people. And blessings can come from a common man if he means it sincerely. So these women were so sincere. They were so happy for Naomi that she wasn't going to be childless and she was having this child. And they saw, they sensed that this child was the beginning of some greatness that should last forever. And they so sincerely were giving her these blessings that literally protected her line many, many, many generations later. It's very interesting on the thought of blessings and the power of one person. If they're sincerely blessing the other one, the angels and God can say amen, and the blessings have true power. I know someone who was, they were childless for many years. And they had a pretty good Jew, but not a tzaddik, not someone we would turn to for blessings, a good Jew, come to his house. And this Jew is very sincere, sort of simple. I mean, he's not smart. He's a smart man, but like sort of simple in his faith. And he knew this was like a good Jew. And he asked him for a blessing for a child. They were childless for many, many years. And the guy was like, I can't give a blessing. Who am I to give a blessing? He's like, no, please, you're in my house. Please give me a blessing. So he said, okay, I'm giving you a blessing that there should be simchas in this house. Meaning that you should have a child, there should be simchas, there should be joyous events in this house with the birth of this child. And this man absolutely believed this blessing. He said, that's it. He said, now I'm going to have a baby, I'm going to have a boy. Because he said there's going to be these happy events, it must mean the circumcision. You have a boy, you have a party Friday night, you have a circumcision, you have all these parties right away. So that's what he meant. In this house, there's going to be these parties. I'm going to have a baby, I'm going to have a boy. And they did. Like about a year later, they had a baby boy. And it was like, you know, how did this man have the power to create such a blessing when they were childless for many, many, many years? A Jew's sincere blessing and another Jew's sincere receptivity and belief in the blessing created a miracle, a nature-defying miracle. So the women are blessing her, saying this child is going to start a whole new line, and he's going to sustain you in your old age. Here, Rus, until now, she's your devoted daughter-in-law. Remember, Rus went out to the fields like the beggars gathering, brought back food for her mother-in-law. Now, obviously, they have money because Boaz passed away. Rus was married to him, so they have his money, so they're okay financially. But just as Rus has been sustaining you until now, well, now this child, your surrogate son, grandson, he's going to sustain you. You're going to be taken care of. This child will take care of you. Then the verse says, verse 16, Naomi took the child, held it to her bosom, and she became his nurse. Now, the Alshech, one of the great sages, say, what does it mean she became his nurse? Obviously, the simple concept is she took care of him, which she did. But the Alshech, one of the commentators, says that miraculously, she was able to nurse this child. So she literally nursed this baby, literally showing how this baby was like her child now. It was literally like in lieu of her dead child, Machlo, her dead son, obviously not a child, and this was now his replacement, another child. The neighborhood woman gave him a name, saying, a son is born to Naomi. Again, what happened to Rus? They're giving Naomi the credit. They named him Oved. Oved means one who serves God. It's very interesting also here, like the women in the community are suddenly giving the names, but the name was truly what he was. He was the complete pure servant of God. He was the father of Yishai, the father of David. So again, Rus, though it seems we're saying Naomi, but we'll say Rus, had this very holy son, Oved, her only child. Oved had a very holy son, Yishai, and Yishai had a very holy son, David, King David, from which is the whole line of Mashiach. So it's interesting, we say a son was born to Naomi, obviously a son was born to Rus, but Rus bore him, Naomi brought him up, he was called Naomi's child, or you could say the whole child came into being because of Naomi. She was the one that pushed. She was the one that told Rus to go that night to appeal to Boaz to take care of the situation. So her pushing and her merits, obviously Rus's merits as well, is really what made this child happen. Another level of why they're saying a son is born to Naomi is to bring his lineage back to Naomi, meaning there were people, and this continued as we'll discuss all the way into David's time. Even though Boaz, his court clearly ruled, there's no problem marrying a Moabite woman convert. It's only the Moabite men that we have the problem with, not the women. But people still question the legitimacy. Remember, I told you last week that Boaz brought one set of witnesses and then another set of witnesses because he understood that people, maybe because people like to go in bad directions, maybe because people just simply were ignorant and didn't really get how it could be only the men. I mean, we know we have this issue with Egyptian converts. Why is it any different? We have an issue with a mamzer. A mamzer, mamzeris is the same law. Egyptian converts, it's the same male, female. Why are we saying for Moavi and Ammoni, it's only men, not women? They couldn't digest that. They didn't process it. But there were always people that were questioning the legitimacy of these children. And therefore, the women are saying, hey, a son was born to Naomi. You know, for those people that look at it and say, Rus, I don't know. I don't know if it was so kosher. Boaz dies that night. Maybe it was divine retribution. They say, look, Naomi also came from the most illustrious lineage. Boaz was a direct descendant of Judah, direct descendant of Nachman, son of Aminadab, the whole line of Judah, the line of the kings, and so was Naomi. Naomi was the granddaughter of Nachman, the son of Aminadab, as was Boaz. So you get from both Nachman, Judah's line. When they left Egypt, the head of the tribe of Judah was Nachshon, the son of Aminadab. He's very famous because he was the first Jew that went into the water when Moses said, just walk and look at this raging sea. What do you mean walk? And he walked, and it says everybody's watching him and saying, Nachshon, you are crazy. He walked, and we don't know what to do because the Egyptians are behind us, the sea is in front of us, but we're not walking into that water. It says he walked and he walked and he walked until his nostrils. And the water came up to his nostrils, the water split for the entire Jewish people. So Nachshon ben Aminadab is a symbol of like absolute belief in God to the degree of self-sacrifice, which is what he did. So he was a very, very renowned Jew. One of his grandchildren is Boaz. One of his grandchildren is Naomi. So the son is born to Naomi. Look at the lineage of this boy on Boaz's side, on Naomi's side. You know, such illustrious lineage. We shouldn't speak bad about this very, very noble child. Now, these are the generations of Peretz. Now we're going to go back again. Until now, this whole book, we're detailing Rus and Moabite and convert and questions. Now let's look at the male side. Again, this enormous lineage of this child. These are the generations of Peretz. Judah, okay? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Yaakov, Jacob's son, is Judah. He has 12 sons, but Judah is the son that's going to be the leader. We know that all the way from the blessings of Jacob, from when the brothers are interacting, Judah is a leader. Judah has 2 sons, twins, Peretz and Zerach. Remember, we discussed last week Judah and Tamar and this holy seed of David, of Mashiach, that's through those children, Peretz and Zerach. Zerach is a holy child. He was a perfect tzaddik, but he was not the line of leaders. He was not the line of David. He was not the line of Mashiach. Peretz was. So Judah to Peretz. This is the line of kings. Everyone knew that from Peretz is coming the kings. So now these are the generations of Peretz. Peretz had Chitzron. Chitzron, another perfectly righteous individual, the son of Peretz. Chitzron had Ram, another perfectly righteous individual. Ram had Aminadav, another perfectly righteous individual. Aminadav had Nachshon, another perfectly righteous individual. Aminadav was one of the greatest people. Nachshon's father, Aminadav, was one of the greatest people, one of the leaders of the Jews when they were enslaved in Egypt. His daughter, Elisheva, became the wife of Aaron, who of course became the high priest. Just to put in perspective how honorable and distinguished was Aminadav, that from Aminadav's daughter married Amram's oldest son. You know, these are the 2 most illustrious families of the Jews in Egypt. So Aminadav was a leader of the Jews. And Aminadav had Nachshon, who again was a leader of his tribe and the leader of the whole Jews, causing the splitting of the sea. Nachshon had Salma. Remember, we keep speaking about these 3 brothers. Nachshon had 3 sons. Elimelech, who was the leader of his people and went off. Chuv, who didn't live up to the opportunity, and Salma. And Salma was the most righteous. And Salma had Boaz. So this line from Judah, from Peretz, Chitzron, Ram, Aminadav, Nachshon, Salma, this is a line of pure godliness. Salma has Boaz, the leader of his generation, very holy, godly person, containing inside of himself this seed of David, of Mashiach. And Boaz had Ovid. Ovid had Yishai. And Yishai had David. And that's why this whole genealogy is recorded. Why do we go through Chitzron and Aminadav and Nachshon and Salma to get to David? Because this whole book is in essence showing us the backstory, so to speak, of what God did to create King David. Now, to understand, as we said though, even though people are so stuck in the mud, look at the line David came from. Boaz, his father, perfectly righteous. Salma, his grandfather, perfectly righteous. Nachshon, his great-grandfather, perfectly righteous, the one that creates the splitting of the 3. I mean, it's a line of kings. It's the greatest line in the whole Jewish family. And still, people spoke bad about Ovid. I don't know if he's so legit. I don't know. I don't know if Rus was so kosher. Well, Boaz's court said he was kosher. I don't know. Boaz died after he married her. I don't know. I know he was holy, but it's the end of his life. Who knows? Ovid was perfectly righteous. His son Yishai, Ovid, Yishai, David. His son Yishai was so righteous, he was so holy that the sages say about him, he only died, as they call it, because of the bite of the snake, because of the original primordial sin. Because otherwise there was absolutely no reason to take him away from this world. He was so pure. So here you have these people whispering about Ovid, but it doesn't make sense. He's so holy. And then they're whispering about Yishai, but it makes no sense. So eventually the whisper sort of died down. Because even though people like to talk bad, it's like this human desire to gossip and dig up some dirt and talk dirt. So even though people like to do that, but how could you talk dirt about such holy people? Obviously, people see Rus at this point. She's quite an older woman, and they see how holy she is. So here's Rus, so pure. Here's Boaz, who was so pure. Here's Ovid, who was so holy. Here's Yishai, who's so holy. But still, in the back of people's minds, it was still there. Now, what happened? Now we're fast forwarding already. We're going we're going probably 20 years, not even 20 years. We're going some 50, 60 years later in the story. Now, most of the whispers have died down at this point because Ovid was so holy, Yishai was so holy. How could you talk about such holy people and say they're not really legitimate Jews? It doesn't even make sense. It's an absurdity. And some 50, 60 years later, the prophet Samuel, who wrote the book of Rus, is told by God that the next successor to the king is one of the sons of Yishai. Now, at this point, there is a king, Saul. Saul was the first king of the Jewish people. Saul only ruled for 2 years. And he started off very righteous, but he didn't live up to the task of being the king. He wasn't able to really control the people properly. He was a very good person himself, but he wasn't able to be a king over the Jews. And he sort of messed himself up a bit in the process. He's a very tragic figure. He was truly a very tragic figure in Jewish history. So already Saul is not meant to succeed. His line is not supposed to be the line of kings. His line was never supposed to be the lines of kings. Saul's from Benjamin. We already know Jacob said the kings are coming from Judah. Moses, the kings are coming from Judah. So the whole concept that Saul from Benjamin was king is already something weird and hard to explain. But he was like the temporary king. In the meanwhile, God said, because of what Saul had done after the war with Amalek, the kingdom will be ripped away from Saul. It will not follow his family. It's going to be given to the real king, the one that's going to be listening to God, i.e. David. So while Saul is ruling, and obviously he didn't want to give up his kingdom for somebody else once he became king, but while Saul is ruling, Samuel gets a prophecy from God that one of Yishai's sons is the next king. Go and anoint him. Now, obviously, he couldn't publicly go and say, okay, guys, I'm an anointing the king mission, because that would be considered rebellion. Saul is the king. And in theory, when Saul dies, his son should take over, even though Saul and Samuel knew that God said, that's it, I gave you the kingdom, you messed up, I'm taking it away from you. But it wasn't so simple. So Samuel sends a message to Yishai, I'm going to come and have a feast with you and your sons. Now, this is a tremendous honor. Yishai does not know he's coming to anoint one of his sons as king. But Samuel is the prophet of the Jews. Samuel is the spiritual leader. Obviously, there was now the physical Saul as the king, and Saul was a honorable person, but Samuel was the true spiritual leader of the Jews, no question. So Samuel, the leader of the Jews, is coming to Yishai. This is a great honor. Now, again, Yishai is very, very holy. He was, as we said, so holy that the sages said he only died because of the bite of the snake. And he was very honorable. He comes from the true line of kings, from the most kingly line of the kingly tribe of Judah. But still, at this moment, Samuel is spiritually the leader of the Jewish people. Yishai is a very holy guy living in his own life, his private life. He's not a public figure. Samuel is a public figure. He's the leader of the Jews. So this was a great honor. And Samuel is saying, I want to have a feast with you and your sons. This was like, wow, amazing. Imagine, like, I don't know, if the Lubavitcher Rebbe says he's coming to your house to meet you and your kids. It was like huge. So Yishai is so excited. He brings all his sons. And Samuel comes, and right away he sees the oldest son, who was a tzaddik, who was a great godly person, looked so beautiful, looked so kingly. He's like, oh, for sure, he's the king. God says, no, he's not. Your eyes are deceiving you. All right, I thought he was the king. He checks all of the 6 sons. And he sees with his spiritual powers, none of them are the king. But he knows God said he's coming to anoint. He brought the special flask. There was a special oil to anoint the kings. He has it. But none of the sons are supposed to be the king. But Yishai's son's supposed to be the king. And he had told Yishai to bring his sons. And Yishai brought these 6 beautiful children. I mean, not children, 6 amazing men, great, holy, godly people. But none of them were the king. So Samuel turns to Yishai and he says, do you have another son? And Yishai's like, oh, yeah, one more. I didn't bring him to the party. What's his name? Oh, David. David was viewed by all of them, even Yishai, who was so godly. He didn't see David. He didn't understand David. None of his older brothers, 6 godly people, God didn't let any of them understand what David's godliness was. David was not. David was viewed, again, the same point as, like, I don't know, he's not like the rest of us. We send him out to the fields to be the shepherd. In the meanwhile, he's in the fields, taking care of the sheep so well, so lovingly, that God says, I want you to tend my flock, the Jewish people. He's singing praises to God all day long when he's in those fields. That's the foundation of the book of Psalms. It's the songs of David that he started composing when he was the nobody shepherd in the fields. It says he was slaying animals with his bare hands, protecting the sheep from all the wild animals. This is a forerunner of David as the warrior that will defend the entire Jewish people and slay all the enemies. But nobody knew about it. None of them understood his value. Again, the same concept. Remember, like, questionable Tamar and Judah, questionable Rus and Boaz, question on Oved, question on Yishai. Now David, even from his own family, he just, like, God just set it up that way. He was just considered, like, I don't know, yeah, whatever, not so special. Not like the rest of the family. Again, the rest of the family was completely righteous. Godly people. But even to them, God didn't uncover who David was. Samuel saying to Yishai, you have another son? He says, David in the field, like, you want to see him? At this point, Yishai understood that Samuel was anointing one of his childs. Look at my 6 beautiful sons. For sure, one of them, the future king. David? Yes, Rivka, that is true. It's a very complicated story, but yes. So Samuel says, bring him. Okay, call David. So he calls David, and David comes. Samuel's holding the flask of oil, the flask that's supposed to anoint the next king. This is a special holy flask of oil. And it says that when Samuel picked up, it was like in a horn. When he picked up this horn of holy oil, it began to bubble, started bubbling, like as if it couldn't wait to go on David's forehead. And when he anointed him, it says the oil hardened. It started glistening on his forehead like pearls and precious stones. And as he's pouring the oil on him, the horn remains completely full. It was a truly miraculous event, not just to show Samuel, not just to show David, to show Yishai and his sons, you've misunderstood David his entire life. David is truly holding this seed from Tamar, from Judah, from Boaz, from Lot, from Moab, from Rus. It's all converged in David. But still, so his family now accepts him. His family understands his holiness. The rest of the world still has a little question on the family, because fast forward a little bit, now we have this war with the Philistines, with the Plishtim, and we have Goliath, this huge giant who's blaspheming God all day long and mocking and taunting the Jews. Who's going to come and try to fight me? Ha, ha, ha. And none of the Jews were terrified. None of the Jews could do it. And it was just shame and disgrace for the Jews. Now, David was too young. He wasn't one of the soldiers. But he came to the field to bring food for his brothers who were older than him, who were the soldiers. And when he sees that Goliath is taunting and disgracing and defaming, blaspheming God, and he sees that no Jew is willing to stand up to him, he said, I'll do it. He said, you'll do it? You're a little kid. You're not even a soldier. He says, I'll do it. So he was brought to the king, to Saul. And Saul was like, wow, if you're willing to, I'm scared. I'm not willing to, if you're willing to do this, I'm going to give you my armor. Now, Saul, it says taller. He was head and shoulders above any Jew. Physically taller, literally, showing his spiritual height. David was young and short for his age. He was short. Physically, he was short. Saul physically was tall, and Saul was much older. And it says when Saul took off his armor and gave it to David, the armor fit perfectly, which made no sense. Saul's tall for the people, David's short, and the armor fit perfectly. And then, of course, David goes and takes his famous slingshot. Now, when David's going with his slingshot to fight Goliath, as of course we probably know that story, Saul, in the meanwhile, is getting nervous. Saul's like, what's going on here? Because he knew, the people didn't know. Perhaps they did, perhaps they didn't, perhaps they forgot, perhaps they knew. But Saul knew that God said the kingship is going to be ripped away from you and given to the more righteous, worthy king. He knows he's supposed to lose the kingship. And he sees his armor fits perfectly on this little runt, That didn't make any sense. So he's right away thinking, and nobody in the entire Jewish camp had the bravery to stand up to Goliath, because of course it was humanly impossible to stand up to Goliath. So David had superhuman bravery, superhuman trust in God, that he, armed with 5 rocks, was going to stand up to Goliath with a slingshot, which of course makes no sense in the world. Of course, a sword would have made no sense either, so it really almost made no difference. And Goliath was an enormous giant. So he sees he has a supernatural bravery, like the bravery of a true king. He sees his armor fits him, and he's thinking in his head, I wonder if this is the kid. I wonder if this kid is the one that God's saying is more worthy than me, and he's supposed to be the king. And he started getting nervous. Now, he knew he was from the tribe of Judah. But again, in the tribe of Judah, remember, there was 2 sons of Judah, Zerach and Peretz, twins from Tamar and Judah. And he knew from Tamar and Judah was going to come the kings. But it wasn't coming from Zerach, it was coming from Peretz. So Judah had another son, Shelah. From him was not coming the kings. Judah had twin sons from Tamar. From Tamar and Judah were supposed to come the kings, but not from Zerach's line, from Peretz's line. So he starts asking his advisors, this kid, David, is he from Zerach or from Peretz? Meaning, I'm scared. He might be the one that's going to take over. If he's from Peretz, I know that's the real line of kings, even though somehow I got appointed and I'm from Benjamin. But it's from Judah and Tamar. It's from Peretz. Is he from Peretz? No, he actually was from Peretz. Remember, Peretz, Chitzron, Ram. We went through the lineage. Aminadav, Nachshon, Boaz, Oved, Yishai, David. So he is from Peretz. But Saul didn't know. If he was from Zerach, Saul's safe. That's not the line of kings. If he's from Peretz, Saul's in trouble. That's the line of kings. So he says to his advisors, as David's getting ready to fight Goliath. Which family in Judah does this kid come from? And everybody understood where he was coming from. They might not have known the prophecy that your kingship will be ripped away from you, but they saw what was going on. You know, David's the only one with the guts to fight Goliath. The king's armor fits perfectly. They understood what was going on. So he's from Paris. Then one man got up, a very wicked man. I see I have to stop. It's a critical point in the story because I'm going to another class right after this one. To be continued. We're at a high moment in the story. A very wicked man gets up. You got to wait for a week to find out what that very wicked man said and who he was. We will stop at this point because last week I didn't attend at all. All right, let's just do quickly one law of Shabbos. So we will definitely finish this next week. So we're going to mention briefly the concept, which is called hatmana. Hatmana means wrapping up something in an item that's close to it, that's portable, and in a place that it could increase heat. So in the time of the sages, what people would do to keep their pots warm on the Sabbath is they would wrap them, they would put them in place like they would bury them in the sand. They're wrapping them up in sand. Problem was that sometimes in the sand they put coals. So the coals are keeping the sand hot, the sand plus the coals are keeping the pot hot. The sage said, no, this is a problem. Because when you want to take your pot out, if the food is not hot enough, you might stoke up those coals. So we're not allowing this whole concept on Shabbos. So what this means practically is, and you talk about something you could do before, it should be before Shabbos, not on Shabbos. On Shabbos, of course, is forbidden, but even before Shabbos, you are not allowed to completely wrap a pot or any food item in a place where there is heat. What that means practically for us would be if you are putting your food on that blech, on that metal plate over your fires, or if you have a warming plate, an electric warming plate, well, an electric warming plate is a source of heat. That metal plate called the blech over the fires, there's heat there, just like in the ancient days with the sand and the coals. Now we don't have coals, we have gas fires, we have an electric warming plate, but that's a source of heat. So if you're in that situation where there's a source of heat, you are not allowed to completely wrap up the food with something that will be close, like directly connecting to the food, and with something portable. Which would mean, practically speaking, let's say you want to put your food and have it wrapped up with a pot. You're putting a pot. You want to wrap up the pot with foil to give it an extra layer of heat. Or you have food that you want to wrap up with foil to give it an extra layer of heat. On the fires directly, like on that blech or on that warming plate, you want to take a towel and wrap it completely around the food, around the foil, around the pot. You're not allowed to do that. If it wasn't on a source of heat, you'd be allowed to. Meaning if you had, before Shabbos, heated up your soup, and you don't want to keep a fire on because it's the summer, you don't want extra fire running in your house, you don't want an electric plate, you're nervous, you don't own an electric plate. You say, no problem. I'm going to wrap it up in a blanket, in a towel, in a few towels. It's going to be contained there that will guard the heat till we eat the soup. You're not allowed to wrap it up completely. You can wrap it as long as some part of it is left unwrapped. But you can't wrap it completely if it's on the fire or if it's on the warming plate. If you took it off the fire or the warming plate completely, there's no source of heat, then you could wrap it completely. But if it's on a place where there is a source of heat, like the fire, like the warming plate, then it can't be completely wrapped in foil or in a towel or anything that would be like close, like completely attached to that item and portable. So again, just the disclaimers. If you would have like a metal box and you put the food in the metal box, well, that's fine because the metal box isn't directly touching the food.
So you can put the food in a metal box on your warming plate, on your blech, kosher. You're not going to put the food on any source of fire. The food's hot. Shabbos is coming in. Before Shabbos comes in, you completely wrap it up in towels. It sits on your kitchen counter, kosher. No problem. Why? Because there's no source of heat. So if there's no source of heat, no problem. If the wrapping is not touching the item, like you put the food in a metal box, which is a box, so it's not directly touching, no problem. But if you put the food in a way that it's directly in contact, like wrapping it up in foil or wrapping it up in a towel, then you can only do that if it's not on a heat source. If it's on a heat source, you can wrap it, but not completely. Part of it has to be exposed. I do this all the time because I have one little fire and I keep my pots a bit away from the fire. So putting a towel over it really does help, but I don't wrap it completely because I'm not allowed to. So I wrap it partially. It does help maintain the heat. All right, we will end on that point. Thank you so much for joining. To be continued next week. Sorry we left at such an interesting moment. And next week we will finish because we're almost done. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.